Welcome to Maximus Live episode 70. Can't believe we've done 70 of these shows. Hope everyone is having a wonderful June. It's almost summertime. And hopefully, the weather in your neck of the woods is feeling warmer. It certainly is here in sunny Santa Monica, California. And let's get this show on the road. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is our weekly call in radio show that we host Thursdays, 6 to 7 Pacific time on Zoom, Twitter Spaces, shout out to our listener there, Instagram Live, and YouTube Live, simulcasting on many different platforms. So we always start out with a weekly unpopular opinion about the state of the world, and then do Q&A in terms of health coaching. So I help men optimize their diet, exercise, sleep, stress, focus, and relationships using behavioral and pharmacological means in order to enhance their testosterone and be better men. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. You can type it in if you are on Instagram or YouTube, or if you're on Twitter Spaces, you can obviously chime in and we can have a live discussion. I think we also have some scheduled folks who are calling in via Zoom to get their questions met. So we can take it from there. I think we're going to get our Instagram Live up in just a second, so bear with us there. Just hit the stream button, and I think there's a couple people who are going to be joining our waiting room soon. So why don't we start out with the weekly unpopular opinion as we wait for some folks to join in and do our health coaching Q&A. So this week's unpopular opinion is that I actually think medication is quite useful for overcoming environmental problems. It's not as useful for overcoming behavioral problems. So the key question that a lot of people are asking is, why is there such a decrease in testosterone and fertility? So testosterone and sperm count have actually gone down 50% in the last 50 years, which is drastic. If you actually think about it, if you compare yourself to your grandfather at when he was your age, he basically had double the testosterone levels that you do. Which is a huge tragedy, I think, to American society. If you've even been following Elon Musk's Twitter tweets, he's been talking about the concomitant fertility epidemic that's come along with that, in that birth rates, especially in a lot of first world industrialized countries, are reaching a point in which we're not even replacing our existing population. We're actually having population shrinkage that's happening. So the question is, why? What is going on that's causing that? Now, it's a multifaceted and complex problem, but certainly we know one of it, especially in the United States, is due to obesity and metabolic disease. And that's largely a behavioral problem, in the sense that it is modifiable, obviously based on your diet and your exercise. So that's one part of it. Certainly we know that depression and other psychological factors also play a part there. The actually change in smoking behavior, which is an interesting discussion for another time, has also changed testosterone levels. But also, it's really due to these endocrine disrupting chemicals. So these xenoestrogens that are in our environment, or synthetic estrogens, are a large contributing factor to the testosterone fertility decline. Now, that's largely an environmental problem, because where do these endocrine disrupting chemicals come from? It comes from the receipts that you touch that are coated in BPA. It literally absorbs into your skin within minutes. So try to minimize receipt exposure. Anything that's flame retardant, clothing, mattresses, carpets, if you touch your skin to them, they are coated in chemicals that are endocrine disrupting. The Teflon pans and air fryers that people like to use so much are potentially carcinogenic and endocrine disrupting. And especially the food, water, in the form of ultra processed foods and beverages, a lot of the cans and containers and packages are lined with BPA, BPS, and other endocrine disrupting chemicals. And that's largely an environmental problem, because, well, unless you're literally hunting and eating nothing but whole foods, which almost no one does these days, it's really, really hard to avoid plastics. As much as we can, I always obviously encourage people to use glass and metal containers, for instance, when you're storing your own food. But obviously, if you're buying stuff that's off the shelf, a lot of beverages, for instance, do not come in glass anymore. Maybe some of the higher end beverages, but almost everything comes in plastics. And a lot of foods obviously are used sort of plastic containers as well. And so it's very, very difficult to minimize the exposure and damage that we get to our hormones and our testosterone as a result. And so, a lot of people ask, well, I want a natural solution, right? Is this solution that you have natural? And the question is, what is the definition of natural? Uh, Obviously, a prescription medication that's synthetic is not natural, but if it's blocking these synthetic estrogens from um, affecting your hormone profile, and that allows your body to produce more of its own natural testosterone. I would actually argue it is relatively natural, because the question is relative to what. And if you're comparing it to testosterone replacement therapy or TRT, in which you're replacing your own natural testosterone production with synthetic exogenous testosterone that comes from outside of your body, I would argue that's a lot less natural, even if it is bioidentical. So the challenge is we can't know how much of these endocrine disrupting chemicals we're getting from our environment, even if there are companies like Million Marker that test for these BPA, BPS, phthalates, etc. You don't know where it's coming from. Is it coming from your pan? Is it coming from the receipts? Is it coming from the food? Is it coming from your clothing? Who knows? It's too much of a difficult problem to constantly test and retest this, other than basically the things that we know causes it, and obviously the stuff that we can minimize. But it's like, are we gonna completely wear dye-free clothing like hippies? No, we have to live in a modern society. It's not really realistic to go back to a hunter-gatherer environment like we used to. So that's why I argue when it comes to environmental factors and barriers, we can't change our environment very easily, right? It's the same thing. It's like the pollution that comes from our food and water. Well, there's a lot of microplastics in there. We theoretically consume a credit card size of microplastics every week. It's kind of gross. There was actually someone in our community, for example, who posted an article talking about how fish is highly polluted with these microplastics, because when we pollute plastics in the ocean, like those little rings that hold your 6-pack of soda cans, they break down into the ocean, they become microplastics, and fish literally consume it as they filter the water. So even if you're buying, wild caught organic salmon, they're still consuming those microplastics, and then when you consume the fish, well, you're consuming it too. So what's the solution to that? Not eat fish? Obviously, that's not a great solution, because we know fish is really healthy. It's high in omega-3s. We can't be OCD about avoiding all these things. And so we have to obviously make a reasonable trade-off. I obviously do encourage eating more wild-caught fish than at least factory farm fish, so that we can at least minimize the pesticide exposure that we're exposed to. But it's not going to eliminate the microplastics exposure that we're exposed to, because look, we have to be reasonable. We have to enjoy life to some degree. I like fish, I like shrimp, and we know it's overall good for you despite a little bit of the toxins that come with it. So you do your best, right? You're not going to eat your fish that are like high on the food chain, like swordfish, marlin, things like that we know are bioaccumulators and high in mercury. But if you eat shrimp, sardines, salmon, which we know are low in mercury, you can obviously enjoy your fish without being too freaked out that you're basically poisoning yourself. So my philosophy is, look, be a reasonable human being. You're obviously going to use plastics. You're going to use synthetic fibers. When you work out, a lot of the stuff is polyester, because, well, you don't want to be drenched in sweat in a cotton t-shirt all day and get a chill if you're hiking or backpacking. There is a benefit sometimes to synthetic things. So that's where, having a pharmacological solution is reasonable. Another good example or analogy to that is, well, it would be awesome if there was a natural solution to avoiding mosquitoes. Now, there is like lemon eucalyptus oil that you can use, but does it work as well as DEET? No. So, I don't love spraying DEET on my skin, but spraying DEET on your external clothing does discourage mosquitoes from biting you. And it is a synthetic pharmacological or chemical solution, but it works well. And is the cost benefit of that worse than getting a mosquito bite and malaria, West Nile virus, or God knows what, mosquito carrying disease that you can risk these days? Well, that's a hard trade-off to make, right? And so it just goes to show, though, that obviously a lot of people, if you're getting stung a lot in a highly mosquito-ridden environment, it is useful to use chemistry, right? Better living through chemistry, and use pharmacological solutions to fight those environmental factors. So because it's super hard to change your environment, and we can't always control our environment, and we're not even sure what in our environment is causing health problems, that's where I do think it is helpful to use pharmacological solutions. Now, when it comes to behavioral issues, that's where I don't think it's a good substitute. So, an example of that is if your testosterone is decreased because you're chronically sleep deprived and you're sleeping less than 8 hours a night, we know that every hour of sleep that you get that's less than 8 hours is contributing to a 10 to 15% decrease in your testosterone. So, for instance, a guy who's sleeping 4 hours a night compared to a man who's sleeping 8 hours a night probably has half the testosterone. Now, there's no magic pill or solution that will fix that. Now, obviously, our protocol can increase often 1.5, 2.5xing your testosterone, but the impact of that is going to be limited by how much you sleep. There is no chemical solution to sleep deprivation. Now, a lot of people obviously try with caffeine to mask their sleep deprivation, but it doesn't remove the premature aging that you're getting from sleep deprivation, even if it's keeping you up artificially by acting as a stimulant. So there's no pharmacological solution for not getting enough sleep. Same thing, we actually had, I was discussing with a member of ours who was overtraining in terms of his physical activity, which was disrupting his cortisol or his stress hormone. Usually when you do that acutely, your cortisol gets really, really high, so you have a lot of acute stress. And then over time, what can happen is that your adrenal glands stop producing enough cortisol in a condition known as adrenal insufficiency. And so, there's no cortisol blocker that you can take or cortisol booster if it becomes chronic that can fix your cortisol if the underlying reason for your cortisol is you're working out 2-3 times a day. You should just stop working out 2-3 times a day instead of trying to take a pill to fix your bad behavior. So when it comes to clearly modifiable factors in which we know the origin that's causing that hormonal disruption, obviously we should focus on changing the behavior and addressing the root cause of it. Now, that's easier said than done, right? Now, someone who's overtraining is probably doing it to deal with underlying psychological stress or anxiety. So that person obviously needs to find an alternative coping mechanism other than exercise in order to calm their ass down. They should be in therapy. And that's what I recommended to anyone who's like overtraining. It's like, obviously you're doing that for a purpose. You found that to be the coping mechanism that you found to reduce your stress. And in small doses, that obviously makes sense. Exercise is a great way of reducing anxiety to a mild to moderate degree. That's what the research literature shows, but it's not a replacement for dealing with those underlying issues and therapy, quite frankly, right? It's a great complement to it. It's not a replacement to it. And, if we overgeneralize or overextend our coping strategies, it can be very unhelpful. Another great example, obviously, is alcohol is often used to reduce social anxiety. Obviously, in social context, it is the great social lubricant, as it were. Now, in small dosage, is not the worst thing in the world, even though there's no amount of alcohol that's technically safe. But if you're obviously chronically drinking and having certainly more than 2 drinks per occasion almost daily, it is absolutely going to decrease your testosterone. Particularly for men, if they're beer drinkers, they don't realize that the hops that come in beer, especially the very IPA-like drinks, which are very high in hops, are actually estrogenic. That's another example of an endocrine disrupting chemical. Now, I wouldn't put that in the category of environment because there's no obviously mandate to drink beer, right? You can obviously choose to just drink water or other beverages. But if you choose to drink bitter beer that's very infused with hops and you choose to do that on a regular basis, or similarly, if you're consuming a lot of soy milk, which we know has phytoestrogens in it, that's obviously a behavioral choice. And if that's what's disrupting your hormones, obviously cut it out, or at least minimize it to a degree where a beer every once in a while, a little bit of tofu on occasion is not going to hurt you. But the guy who was drinking 3 quarts of soy milk a day and literally developed man boobs ended up in a medical paper as a case study because, he obviously poisoned himself basically with these phytoestrogens and literally developed male breast tissue. So, in pharmacology, we obviously say the dose is the poison. And so you don't want to overdo these things. I actually had a buddy of mine, JT, and I can share this story because he was on my podcast, who talked about developing kidney stones because he was making, spinach smoothies every day. And 3 cups of spinach has so much oxalates that it was actually helping him in a negative way develop kidney stones. So all of these are examples in which, when we know that there's a behavior and it's clearly causing the hormone disruption in the first place, that's not a pharmacological fix. It's a behavioral fix. And you have to identify what the behavior is, the root cause that's causing the issue, and fix that. That's why, as part of the Maximus King Protocol, we do health coaching, because a lot of guys, they just see they're on their lab test. Well, my testosterone's low. Great, let me take a medication and fix it. That's true if it's environmental, which for all of us it's environmental because we're highly polluted. But in every individual case, there may be additional factors, like the guy that's overtraining, like the guy that's consuming too much beer or too much tofu, or the guy who's not sleeping enough, or the guy who has too much chronic stress. Those are individual, and that's where it really benefits from talking to a healthcare professional and figuring out what are the individual causes that apply to me in my case that I can do to fix the behavioral stuff, the stuff that is in my control, so that I can make sure that those aren't causing suppression or deficiencies in the first place. And then on top of that, I can take the pharmacological medication that can address some of the environmental factors, the endocrine disrupting chemicals that I cannot control, I cannot see, I cannot easily measure. And so it's really that 1-2 punch. So that's this week's unpopular opinion, is when it comes to, now this is a general rule, more environmental factors, pharmacology is very helpful. When it comes to more behavioral factors, obviously health coaching and psychotherapy is very helpful. So, and I think obviously the combination of both of them is very synergistic, because one better addresses the environmental, the other better addresses the behavioral means, and you get twice the benefit from when you do both together, which is why we provide both as part of the Maximus program. If you're ever interested in what we're doing, check us out at maximustribe.com. We're currently in 15 US states, and if you're not in your state, then we'll be hopefully in yours shortly to help you address those things.
We had comments via YouTube. Good thing I started having my receipts emailed. You literally can't escape it. EPA warned about forever chemicals in our water systems recently.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Whenever people ask if I want the receipt, I'm like, no, thank you. And yeah, obviously, if you need to do it for an expense report for work, get it emailed or just snap it on your phone. And that's the best way to do it. That is a great point. There was an article that recently came out about, it's a really scary term, forever chemicals, right? We assume that these chemicals that we're putting out, biodegrade, but that doesn't always happen. And we learned this lesson the hard way with the, I believe it was the California condors or the bald eagles. One of the pesticides that we were spraying, which I believe was DDT, was lasting for a long time in our environment. It was literally contaminating the water. The fish would consume it. The birds, the condors or the eagles that were consuming the fish, it would bioaccumulate in their systems, and it made their egg shells so fragile that they were not able to successfully give birth, and they were becoming extinct. And we didn't even realize it until we're like, man, what's wrong? Where are all the condors or the eagles basically disappearing to? And we realized that we messed up by polluting our environment. Now we banned DDT as a pesticide, and then started an environmental preservation program to bring back these birds by obviously promoting their mating, and now we've seen a resurgence of them. But we almost came close to like completely making some of these species go extinct because of our dumb idea of polluting ourselves. The sad thing is we're doing that to ourselves. It's not just to birds, right? But we don't realize it until we've seen this research on this tremendous testosterone and sperm count decline. So we're making ourselves basically go extinct as a species. In fact, there was a whole article about this, I believe in GQ or one of these magazines, called Sperm Count Zero, saying that if the fertility decline continues, we'll basically hit sperm count zero by the year 2050 and basically not be able to reproduce as a species. Now, I don't think that'll actually happen, but it is concerning, and it's certainly becoming harder. And in fact, I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. I was talking to a former classmate of mine from Harvard who's now a physician, and was saying that, before, when you see couples who have advanced maternal age, which is women over 35, and in men, advanced maternal age is over 40, that's when you start seeing fertility problems and having to do IVF. She was saying that she's seeing, couples in their 20s having trouble conceiving, which is not advanced maternal or paternal age, but they're so polluted, they're so out of shape, their testosterone and estrogen are so out of whack that they're really having trouble having children, even at reasonable young ages. So it's very, very concerning when you're seeing signs of that happening with otherwise what should be healthy young people being maybe not so healthy overall, to the point that they literally cannot have kids without severe medical intervention. Like, IVF, hundreds of injections. If it wasn't for the miracle of modern medicine, they would not be able to pass on their bloodline. And if you think about that, that is a very sad reflection of our modern society. So it's something that we absolutely need to pay attention to and address.
We had a comment from Striven. I sleep 7 to 8 hours per night, but according to my Garmin watch, I get less than an hour of deep sleep and sometimes 2 hours of REM sleep. Is quality of sleep important for testosterone levels and testosterone production?
Yes, that's a great question. So, quantity and quality of sleep matter. Some people have this misguided notion that you can somehow biohack sleep and minimize the amount of sleep by doing these weird Uberman methods or polyphasic sleep. There's no evidence to support that you can somehow shortcut your sleep. And we don't really fully understand sleep, I would argue, to a full degree, where we argue, oh, deep sleep is the good part, REM sleep's not important, or light sleep's not important. They probably are all important. They just serve probably different functions in terms of physiological restoration, memory consolidation, etc. Maybe even emotional processing when it comes to our dreams. It may be like even things that are more profound than that. So I think all the phases of sleep are important. It's not necessarily clear that some are more important than others, but we do know that they should be in relatively reasonable proportions to one another, where let's say an hour of deep sleep is relatively normal, I would say. We certainly know that you do want to get some REM sleep, and it's usually in the second half or latter half of the night, or typically morning actually, is when you get your REM sleep, in which you're dreaming. And so all of those things sort of follow natural rhythms, and they're in natural proportions, which your body knows how to take care of, as long as you're not doing things like drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, or consuming caffeine, which we know disrupts, often suppresses REM sleep. And so this is an interesting thing that we found. Like when people often go off drinking alcohol or marijuana on a regular basis, they get this interesting REM rebound effect, where they don't dream when they're smoking or drinking. When they stop it, they get really vivid dreams, very frequent dreams, because their body's almost making up for it. It's like, oh, you didn't allow me to have REM sleep because you chemically suppressed it. And now that you've stopped polluting yourself essentially with these exogenous substances, I'm going to catch up with that REM sleep and try to get a little bit more. The body's really beautiful and intelligent if you think about it, right? Even the stupid things that we do to it, it almost tries to like find its own balance or homeostasis, despite basically our very human stupidity. Now, to your question, quality of sleep does matter a lot. It's hard to know really what optimizes quality of sleep, other than basically letting your body do what it does. And I'll give you a couple things that I think are important. We do know that temperature makes a difference in terms of quality of sleep. We actually, even though the guidance, if you go online, says that like 60 to 67 degrees is the optimal temperature, it's actually a total myth, because it depends on other factors. It depends on if there's wind in your room, what's the humidity in your room, are you using sheets or a thick comforter, are you wearing clothing, what's your your intrinsic body temperature. Some people run a little hot versus a little cold. All of those things influence actually how cold your room should be. So unfortunately, a lot of people just like crank down their thermostat and make it super chilly, thinking, oh, I gotta sleep in 65 degrees because that's what I read from Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep or some random Twitter thread. No, the reality is it should feel slightly cool, and you can just test this yourself by, are you waking up sweating, or are you sweating a lot during the night? That's too hot. Are you shivering a lot? That's too cold. You want to be in that happy Goldilocks zone of neither shivering nor sweating. It should just feel slightly cool, but it should be pleasant. You shouldn't be freezing throughout the night, waking up all disturbed because you're trying to hack your sleep and get better quality of sleep. No, listen to your body. Trust your intuition in that you know what's comfortable. The body gives you feedback signals. You know when you're too hot, and similarly, you know when you're too cold. You just want to find that just right zone, listen to yourself, and obviously adjust your environment, whether it's the thermostat, I actually really am a huge fan of silk sheets or more breathable bedding, and adjust your layers depending on the environment. Obviously, maybe in the summertime you need less thick sheets, and in the wintertime you need thicker stuff. So just use your common sense and make sure that the temperature is correct. Second, you want to eliminate lighting as much as possible. So if you can install blackout shades. Those are best. If not, use an eye mask. And a lot of people are like, "Wow, do I need an eye mask every night?" I'm like, "Well, are you sleeping in past sunrise? If you're sleeping in past sunrise, you are getting light on your eyes and your skin, which reduces melatonin production, and it makes it you get out of that deep sleep more into the REM phase, and you're more likely to wake up early. So if you're trying to sleep in, then using an eye mask is very effective in terms of maintaining a more elongated or extended, deeper sleep phases, and making sure that you can sleep in more in order to increase the quantity of your sleep. So I'm actually a big fan of using sleep masks, especially in this age of light pollution, artificial light, and obviously a lot of people sleep in past sunrise. So I actually think that's a very important tip. A lot of people are magnesium deficient. So actually, grab this bottle right here. This is the launch of our new Maximus Building Blocks supplement. And the cool thing about it is one of the things that we upgraded from our previous 80K eVail supplement is the addition of magnesium. So generally speaking, most people should be consuming 200 to 400 milligrams of magnesium, but there's a better form that just came on the market called magnesium acetyltaurate. And they've done studies looking at the brain absorption. Now, if you're using it for sleep, it's very different than using it for your muscles. So for instance, a lot of people, they may get like muscle cramps if you're an athlete and you're taking it for muscle cramping, then it doesn't matter. You can use magnesium glycinate and those citrate, those cheaper forms of magnesium. But if you're trying to get it to cross the blood-brain barrier in order to reduce your stress, reduce your anxiety, and to fall asleep and stay asleep better at night, the best form is magnesium acetyltaurate, which we've included here. And the studies, in fact, show that you only need 45 milligrams of magnesium acetyltaurate, and it actually absorbs into your brain better than 400 milligrams of magnesium glycinate and magnesium citrate, the two most popular forms of magnesium. The problem with those forms, though, especially the citrate, I would say, is at 400 milligrams, if you try to take 400 milligrams of magnesium citrate, you will get diarrhea. It's, in fact, a laxative that's used in people who have constipation. You do not want to take 400 milligrams of magnesium citrate unless you want to get up in the middle of the night and get the runs. Magnesium glycinate is a little easier on the GI system, but even if you go look at any of the supplements like Doctor's Best, they only usually provide 200 milligrams at a time. You usually try to divide the dose in order to prevent that GI complication. But when you divide the dose, doesn't get as much of that brain absorption. You don't get as much of that relaxed feeling as obviously taking a higher dose. So the best solution is magnesium acetyltaurate if you're trying to take it for the mental or psychological benefits, because you don't have to take as much of a dose, and it has that really great absorption. We include 45 milligrams, which is the evidence-based dosage that's used in the research studies. And you don't have to take so much, right? With the other forms like the magnesium citrate, which I've tried, you got to take a big, like 7-8 gram scoop, mix it with water, stir it around. With this, it's 3 pills, and it's essentially an essential multivitamin. So it includes vitamins A, D, K in their best forms. It also includes all the B vitamins, which are really critical for energy, but it uses their best forms that are really bioavailable as well. Like, for instance, we use P5P, which is the correct form of vitamin B6 to use, which Andrew Huberman did not mention. Otherwise, you get neuropathy symptoms. It also includes zinc and copper, which is really important for hormone production. And we use some very special compounds that are extracted from the annatto seed, which if you're interested in, we had a whole podcast with Dr. Barry Tan talking about why the special form of vitamin E in the form of tocotrienols have very potent free radical scavenging abilities because it's a very potent antioxidant. And also geraniol, which is one of the building blocks of vitamin K, which is essential for testosterone production. Lastly, I snuck in some saffron. Saffron is really one of the rare herbal supplements that's actually very effective. In fact, there's randomized clinical trials showing that it's as effective as methylphenidate or Ritalin in adolescents that have ADHD. So it really helps with focus. It also has a lot of good literature on improving depression. So it's a great mood and focus enhancer. We put a nice 15 milligram dose, not too much, not too little, to just give you that energy, mood, and focus benefit as well. This will be actually released in about a week or two. You can't buy it on its own. We're only making it available for our patients who are on one of our protocols. So if you sign up for the King Protocol, we'll discount this to $39.99. It's actually a great deal. If you compare it, for instance, to Thorne's multivitamin, the Thorne Multi Elite, which I would argue is the second best multivitamin on the market, that's $67 a month. This is better. It actually has much higher dosages of vitamin D and better forms of magnesium. And it's only $39.99 if you buy one of our another protocols, including the Lover Protocol, which is launching in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for that. And that will be really helpful in the long story short, making sure that you don't have any nutritional deficiencies like magnesium. Make sure that you're getting the quality sleep that you mentioned. That makes a big difference in terms of rest and restoration. All right. Someone on Instagram said, hey, I would like to order without lab tests. Is that possible? No, absolutely not. Why would you want to not know what the lab tests are? Because that's how we know that our protocol works. You shouldn't take my word for it. We prove it through third-party lab testing. So even if you believe me that it works, the other reason that we lab test you is because we use it to adjust your dosage. So with a thing like a supplement, you don't need to adjust your dosage because the dosages are relatively well characterized. And if you take some excess vitamin B, it's water soluble, you urinate it out, it's not a big deal. When you're taking prescription medications like this, you want to make sure that you're taking the right dose. And so the doctor who's prescribing the lab test and the medications, is looking at how much your testosterone increases to get you into that optimal high normal range. And so we have to know what the lab tests are to A, make sure that you're safe, and B, that it's optimally effective. So you absolutely should do before and after lab testing as part of our protocol, and it wouldn't be ethical anyway. Otherwise, if any doctor is prescribing you stuff without lab testing, especially as it pertains to testosterone, no doctor, honestly, that I know would do that. So don't play doctor and try to do it yourself. This is something that really needs to be medically supervised in order for them to be able to do their jobs effectively. I talked about in one of the previous podcasts in terms of the weekly unpopular opinion that don't play your own sort of doctor, or coach for this very reason, right? Even doctors go to their own doctors. I certainly do. So, all right. This Instagram commenter said a lot of guys are dying early because of it. Yeah, we actually don't know the longevity effects of decreased testosterone. I don't think actually that is well established. But we do know that guys are dying early of metabolic syndrome. So if you do have obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, dyslipidemia, that spectrum of conditions, you're definitely dying early of that. And we do have some preliminary data that shows that guys who optimize their testosterone improve their metabolic condition. So I think if you're young, healthy, fit, don't have a lot of excess body fat, increasing your testosterone may not make you live longer. We just don't know. Right? I don't think the data is there for me to make that assertion. But let's say if you're obese and testosterone helps you lose weight, and obviously losing weight can help you live longer. So indirectly, it may improve longevity if you have an underlying obesity or metabolic condition. I can tell you some interesting anecdotal data that we're getting back from our clients. Some of our clients are, obviously in the tech industry. They're kind of into biohacking. So they kind of go above and beyond in terms of doing measurements. So they're measuring actually using in-body or other tools, their muscle and body fat as a response to the protocol. And interestingly, they're finding increases in muscle mass, which is not surprising. When you increase your testosterone, it's easier to put on muscle. In fact, the research shows that with this class of compounds, you can put on about 5 pounds of lean mass in about 12 weeks. But it's really cool to see the charts on the data. In fact, if you go on my Twitter, I think under Dr. Kama RX, I posted a couple weeks ago one of our clients' charts of his muscle mass going up and his body fat going down. I actually just had another client send me an email update saying, hey, I'm traveling Europe right now and my diet's not perfectly on point, but the crazy thing is continuing to take the medication, my muscle mass is continuing to trend up, my body fat is continuing to trend down, And so even without a perfect diet, I'm still getting the benefits and improvements in body composition, which is really cool to see, right? And that's really the power of medications. I know sometimes people are like, you know, like, I don't want to take something that's like prescription or a medication. And I'm like, well, do you want to take something that works or is powerful or not? And I'll tell you an interesting anecdote about why this is really interesting. I took a class on exercise physiology and sports performance when I was at Harvard. And it was a great class. It was a whole year long. And one of the professors, who I think was also taught at Boston College or Boston University, asked us a really profound question, which is, when is it considered cheating, right? When is an ergogenic substance, like for instance creatine, which is you can buy over the counter, probably the most studied sports supplement ever. We know it works actually, right? And does increase muscle mass and sports performance. How is that different than taking steroids, which is considered cheating, which is also performance enhancing, right? Where do we draw the line of that's okay and that's not okay? Even things like caffeine, for instance, which is obviously legal, if you take it in sufficient dosages, or L-carnitine, it actually starts to creep into the banned substance category. And he had a really interesting argument. He was like, here's the difference between creatine and steroids. If you take creatine and sit on your ass on the couch and don't lift a finger, you're not going to actually get much benefit from it. Now, if you go to the gym and take creatine, it increases your ATP production, which is one of the building blocks of one of the energy conduits. It will let you do more reps when you're doing that bench press, and maybe that extra rep or two that you do will let you put on more muscle mass. So it's a synergistic compound. It doesn't work on its own, but when you do it in combination with strength training, it does enhance the results a little bit, a modest bit, but it's not going to make you look like Ronnie Coleman or Mr. Olympia. Now, steroids are a very different thing. Now, if you take steroids and sit on your ass on the couch, you will still get big. It's in fact so powerful that literally you can be a couch potato and you can put on muscle mass. In fact, a lot of the anabolic androgenic drugs that were developed were originally developed for patients who had some sort of muscle wasting condition. So these were patients who had AIDS or had some condition in which they're hospitalized, or maybe elderly, in which they're literally losing muscle mass. And so they would test these substances because they're bedbound. They're not working out at a gym. They're just like literally laying all day and their muscles are atrophying. And they found that their muscles would either retain or grow on these anabolic androgenic substances. So that's why steroids are very clearly banned as opposed to creatine. Now, obviously, if you take steroids and lift weights, it's even more synergistic, and then you can put on a ridiculous amount of muscle, obviously in not a way that's safe or healthy. It probably will, quite frankly, cut your lifespan short. We had a number of very famous competitive bodybuilders die in the last year or two in their 40s and 50s, which is really sad, because a combination of underlying genetic predispositions, probably exacerbated by the steroids, resulted in negative cardiovascular events and outcomes. So I think that's really the difference between creatine and steroids, and the difference between over-the-counter supplements and pharmacological medications. Now, the beautiful thing about what we're doing is, it's definitely not as strong as steroids in terms of putting on muscle mass, but it's somewhere in between both of them, in that it's definitely more effective than any supplement. Like I said, no supplement's going to increase your testosterone by over 50%, which is the threshold to provide a clinically meaningful benefit that you're going to feel in terms of your performance. But on the other hand, it's not going to ruin your liver or other organs like steroids will. So I think there is a place, a really powerful place, for prescription medications that are better than supplements, but not as negative as some of the injectable anabolic androgenic substances. So they give you this sweet spot, if you will, between safety and efficacy. And that's the best thing that we want in a drug. Obviously, you want the biggest benefits with as little cost as possible. Now, everything has a risk of side effects. All medications do, which is, by the way, one interesting tangent as a useful thing to clarify for people. A common question that people ask about our protocol is, does it have side effects? That's actually not the correct question to ask. All medications have a risk of side effects, right? It's not the question of does it have it or not. All medications, if you give it to enough people, will have some side effects in some people. So the real question is, what is the risk of side effects? Are they common or not? In our case, with our medication, for an example, in clomiphene, the side effects in the clinical trials were 1 to 3%, meaning that 97 to 99% of people did not experience any side effects. So, does it have side effects? It's not a yes or no question. The question is the frequency. I would say for 97 to 99% of people, it doesn't have any side effects at all. And for 1 to 3% of people, it does. So, it doesn't most of the time is the accurate answer to that question. The second thing you want to ask is, well, what are the side effects? Are they like death? Or is it headache, dizziness, and nausea, which is the case within clomiphene? They're very mild side effects. And third, well, did the side effects go away when you stop taking it? Yes, they're not permanent side effects. If you honestly do have some side effects, you can stop taking it or change the dosage, right? Like if you take too much of a dose, for instance, it can reduce your libido, which is ironic because low doses increase libido. If you take too much, it can decrease your libido. So you got to find the right dosage. And so that is a side effect of the wrong dose, but the solution is to just titrate it to the appropriate dose. So that's the real issue with side effects is the frequency, the severity of the side effects, and the temporariness versus the permanence of the side effects. So everything is a risk in life, right? Even when you take creatine has side effects. It helps you. It puts on. It gets your muscles to retain more water. Now, is that a side effect or a benefit? Some people don't like it because they're going to weigh more because you're holding on to more water and doesn't make your scale number look good. On the other hand, if you're trying to look like you have full muscles or muscle bellies, it kind of inflates you a little bit and makes you look a little fuller. So to that person, it's a benefit. But if you're trying to be really shredded as a bodybuilder, you don't want that. In fact, a lot of professional bodybuilders take diuretics to flush the water out. So maybe that's a side effect to that person. So is it a benefit? Is it a side effect? Well, I guess it depends on the person and what they consider beneficial or harmful. So that's the other thing to think about is what is one man's problem is another man's benefit. The best example, by the way, of this is this one of the side effects of SSRIs is anorgasmia. It delays orgasm, which is quite annoying if you're trying to obviously enjoy your sex and finish your orgasm and move on with your life. But if you have premature ejaculation, it's actually a benefit. So in fact, you'll see companies, other telemedicine companies like Hims or Roe, prescribe SSRIs off-label for the treatment of premature ejaculation. So that's why I'm saying one man's side effect is another man's benefit. They're just effects. Are they a side effect or a beneficial effect? Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So that's why there's so much complexity to pharmacology, which I think is so interesting and it's worth talking about, and sorry to hear me rant about, because things are not as black and white when you're a clinician or a scientist. Now, to the general public, they're just like, well, is it safe or not? Does it have a side effect or not? Is it risky or not? Well, and the answer, when you're being honest or you're being a scientist, is always it depends. It depends, and you have to make that individual choice for yourself in consultation with a physician to decide if that cost benefit is worth it for you and for the goals that you're trying to achieve. Is it providing enough benefit that it's worth the risk for the cost? I think the important thing to realize in the modern day and age, we have to not be afraid of medications. We have to not be afraid of vaccines and supplements even, right? It's all about just making that cost benefit analysis. Because look, the reality is like supplements, medicines, vaccines are beneficial net to society, right? Your ancestors got a cut on their hand, and if they had bad luck and that thing got infected, they might lose their hand, if not lose their life, due to an unfortunate infection. And now with the blessing of modern antibiotics, you don't have to die from a random infection. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is, right? It's the same thing. Like people have a very short-term memory. If you want to be horrified, go YouTube videos about the permanent disability that smallpox caused. We eradicated smallpox on the face of this earth for the most part due to vaccines. And it's the same thing. So, and like vitamin D deficiency needs to be a thing of the past, even though we don't get enough sunlight these days. We can't live outside like we used to, like our hunter or farmer ancestors. So now we can take it in the form of a pill. It's a good modern solution to an environmental problem, as I was talking about. And so I think we have to be reasonable in saying, well, what's natural, what's not? When should I take a medication? When should I not? It depends on the circumstances And are you getting that cost benefit that makes it favorable, right? And so I really do believe in the philosophy better living through chemistry. Always try to do things as naturally, holistically as possible, but it doesn't mean we should be afraid of using these things as needed, right? Especially if you want to be better than normal. Because think about it this way, all of us are born with almost like the cards that we're dealt. Some guys are born with low testosterone because of honestly shitty genes. Some guys are naturally high in testosterone. Those guys that become the alpha males, they sleep with the prom queen, and they're the high school quarterback, and I don't know, they do better in life. And for a lot of history, your fate was almost genetically determined in the sense that, well, higher testosterone guys do better, right? And for the first time in human history, you can take your destiny into your own hands. You can alter your testosterone if you're smart enough, you have the means, and you use companies like ours that can do that in a safe and effective way. So it's a radical, I would argue, democratization of society where, sure, you want to be all natural and be in the 5th percentile and have 95% of guys have higher testosterone than you and have a competitive advantage when it comes to work, dating, success. That's up to you. I'm not going to fault anyone for the choices they make. But I think in a hyper competitive, especially an individualistic society like the United States, in which you're constantly evaluated, you constantly judge, your performance matters. And unfortunately in America, really the strong survive and the best get disproportionate outcomes, right? The overwhelming majority of wealth is owned by a very small percentage of highly, highly productive, hardworking people who are probably have naturally high testosterone, naturally high conscientiousness, and very high impulse control. We know that these 3 factors in particular make people very industrious, hardworking, and disproportionately successful. And even though we can't change our personalities, we can change our testosterone, which does influence our motivation, drive, confidence. And so, if you really believe in this concept of performance enhancement and optimization in order to be a better man and have a better life, then, I think it's a fair thing to consider, obviously. All right. Someone was asking about, is there a contraindication if FSH levels are too high as an alternative product that you offer? I think in the future we will expand our product line to have alternative offerings, but anything that increases testosterone naturally will increase LH and FSH. It's only the testosterone replacement therapy that suppresses it, essentially. Although I would question the notion that there's too high of an LH or FSH. There's probably not clinical consensus about what is too high exactly. There's not a clear cutoff of what's too high in terms of LH or FSH. There is a reference range which we consider normal, but there is anecdotal experience, at least with LH, for instance, that some guys actually do fine at the high normal or even somewhat super physiological range compared to kind of being in the normal range. So I think this is where individual results are going to differ, and that may be true for FSH as well. But anyway, that aside, I think we will have different types of products that are part of the King Protocol that increase testosterone. So probably in the next couple of months, you'll see different options that are out there, but they're going to work in similar mechanisms. So I'm not sure it necessarily is going to be the solution that you're looking for. Any other comments from YouTube that came up?
We had a comment via Discord. Dr. Kim, what's your opinion on pre-biotics versus probiotics, and one brand such as Seed for prebiotics?
Yeah, great question. I am a bigger fan of prebiotics versus probiotics for preventative or prophylactic use. So if you're talking about if you don't have a GI condition, I think probiotics make sense in the context of very particular GI conditions. Like maybe after a run of antibiotics, taking some probiotics makes sense. Although I think there's even some conflicting research about whether that strategy is actually even effective. But I think it does make sense. Well, okay, you've wiped out your gut microbiome, to try to reconstitute it Or if you have some sort of particular GI issue, there's some emerging research that particular strains of probiotics may be helpful for that condition. That's obviously a paradigm in which you're trying to diagnose and treat a particular thing. Let's put that aside for now because that doesn't apply to most people. For most people, they just want a healthy gut. They just want to be regular, in terms of their bowel movements, and they want to just be maximally healthy. In that case, the more primary preventative approach is to just consume fiber, natural fiber, and prebiotics. I actually am not a fan of seed. I don't think actually there's a very strong research literature on that. Not to knock that company, but it's a very expensive probiotic product that I'm not really convinced really works, right? What you should consume is just natural prebiotics in the form of fiber. An example of a prebiotic is like pectin, for instance, which occurs naturally in apples, for instance, or my favorite fruit, baobab. Baobab is half fiber and it's mostly prebiotic fiber. And so the Hadza, which are a hunter-gatherer tribe that have literally been eating the same way for the last 10,000 years, have been very well studied in terms of their gut microbiome. And they have the most diverse gut microbiome of any population that we've studied here on Earth. Now, do we think that's associated with better health outcomes? We don't know. That's to be determined. But what we do know is that they have almost no obesity. They have almost no diabetes, less than 1%. And now that may be due to other factors such as their lack of sedentariness and obviously eating basically zero unprocessed, ultra-processed food. So I'm not saying it's absolutely because of that, but it is an interesting association that basically the culture that has the most diverse gut microbiome that's consuming 100 to 150 grams of fiber or baobab a day, which is a massive amount of fiber, probably like, who knows, 75 plus grams of fiber, which would probably give you GI problems if you tried taking that much without working your way up to it. I think the RDI in the United States is like 20 to 30 grams of fiber, and most Americans don't even consume that much. I think is a much smarter approach. I'm a huge fan of baobab. You can buy it. My favorite brand is Terrasol. You can get it on Amazon. And so just consume a lot of fibrous fruits in particular, I think are a great source of prebiotics and will help reconstitute your gut microbiome in sort of a natural way. So that's my recommendation. Do that rather than taking some overpriced supplement, to be honest.
We had a comment via YouTube. I had an amazing result after being on the 6.25 milligram enclomiphene for 30 days. Levels from 435 T to 1042. How high can testosterone increase?
Well, fantastic to hear that result. It's amazing to see someone go from the 400s to 1,000 plus. It sounds like it's a 2.5x increase. The thing that I've talked about in previous shows is free testosterone is more important than total testosterone. If you have your lab results, the gentleman who posted that, post your SHBG before and after if you can. Because what I would suspect is, when you have a total testosterone of 1,000, typically your SHBG is higher, right? And as I've talked about, your body will produce more total testosterone to compensate for the high SHBG, which means that you typically have more of like a medium free testosterone. So 1,000 is very high for total testosterone. It's probably in the 90 plus percentile range. But if your SHBG is high, your free testosterone may be high, but it's not 90th percentile. So I don't think you necessarily need to be concerned about total testosterone being high if we know what your free testosterone is, and that's the more useful measure. If free testosterone is over, say, like 266 picograms per milliliter, I believe, that's like 99th percentile for 19 to 39-year-old healthy non-obese men. So if you're above 266, then you're really into a super physiological range, meaning you're beyond really what's normal. You wouldn't really see someone naturally above that range. And we generally try not to push people above that range. Your doctor will probably titrate your dosage down if that's the case. My bet is even with your total testosterone over 1,000, your free testosterone is not over 266. So so we have to make sure of that. And then second, look, how you feel is more important than the numbers. Some people feel good at 1,000. Some people feel good at 500, to be honest, because they're low SHBG. And so their free testosterone is the same as your free testosterone. So we focus a little bit more on how you feel, and if you feel good at that number, then and your doctor agrees, then it's probably fine.
He commented his SHBG increased from 51 to 69.
And what was his total testosterone?
42.
Yeah, so it's exactly what I was speculating. So this gentleman's free testosterone is at 153, which is obviously a nice above, like I think it's slightly above average result. So probably went from being below average to slightly above average, which is great. But it's not to be concerned about, because 153 is, not high actually at all. So it's very, I would argue it's in a safe, relatively normal range. In fact, you can see someone, as I was saying, if their SHBG was 20 and their total testosterone was 500, you think, oh, that guy has half as much testosterone. No, he doesn't. That guy would actually have very similar free testosterone levels. It'd be 135, in fact. So that's why I say pay attention to free testosterone, not total testosterone. You're very much in a normal free testosterone range. And like I said, what ultimately matters is how you feel. So if you feel good, great. You got a nice doubling to 2.5x of your levels. So keep up the good work, and you should be good to go. Awesome, everyone. We are at time today. We had just one last question. Can teens use this? No. You have to be 18 plus this is an adult protocol. So great questions, everyone. Thank you for everyone who joined us on YouTube. One last comment on Instagram. My SHBG stays under 15 no matter what. Is that normal? Yes, SHBG is mostly genetic. So as long as it's been like that forever, it's fine. You get more free testosterone that way. But you're also at higher risk for insulin resistance. So be very careful. Check your blood sugar and make sure that you're not developing diabetes. That's what I would say there. Thank you for everyone who joins us on Twitter Spaces. We got a couple listeners there. Shout out to Shane, the popularizer of dopamine fasting. Thank you for helping promote my work there. Obviously very beneficial. And thanks for everyone who joined us on Zoom as well. We'll take our break now, and I'll catch you all next Thursday at 6 o'clock Pacific time. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your week.